Hey everyone, this is Liz from MediaDev, and today I am joined by our ISV OEM outreach specialist, Matt. Hi Matt, how are you today?
Hi Liz, I'm doing great, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Today our topic is how can I build my OEM ecosystem, diversify, and not be overly US centric? So Matt comes to us with a lot of knowledge and experience, having spoken to many different types of OEM program holders looking to target ISVs. So I'm excited to hear insight about this topic, Matt. So I'm going to dive right into the questions. Why do you think it's important to make sure your OEM partner ecosystem is not overly US centric in the first place?
Well, I think the answer to this is rather obvious, maybe, but the software industry is becoming more and more a global thing rather than a US centric one. I mean, the customers are all over the world. People worldwide have access to internet and to technology. So I think also the software industry outside the US is quickly developing. So you can think of the fast-growing Chinese counterparts of the U.S. tech giants. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, so which says enough. But not only them, because also you will find lots of promising, fast-growing startups across markets outside the U.S. So I think as a program holder, what you would want to do is you will not limit yourself to mainly the US market if there is lots of interesting, promising ISVs and startups across the globe, I guess, right? And not to forget all these players also belonging to the hottest ISV market segments I just mentioned, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or cloud computing, or fintech, just to name a few.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's looking for that, the next unicorn. So, sometimes that may come from a developing market or some obscure kind of place. So, for sure. So, as we know, one size fits all marketing messages really don't work. So, have you noticed that US based, OEM program holders have adapted their messages when targeting markets outside of the US, or is their messaging still very American?
Well, they depend on, of course. I think many program holders and different program holders use different tactics, but so it's a yes and no at the same time. I've come across companies that are actively reaching out to ISVs outside the US, and I see they also understand the importance of local outreach. They work with local people there, but of course, there's also a number of players that has a more standardized policies and messaging being written in English, and it looks also a bit American, I may say so. So I think that it's not a bad thing. Of course, everybody in the IT industry more or less speaks English, but I think it's also important that there are also many people across the globe that speak English, but might feel a bit more comfortable when being addressed in their own native language. So, and I think the outreach in local language and using local content and using native speakers might people just might have them feel more confident and comfortable. So I think the outreach will be more efficient.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do think, as an American myself, I think we have the tendency to think that because, our influence is kind of so large across the globe and so many people do speak English, that just means, they align with our culture. And I, know from experience that that's really not true. And my husband actually makes fun of me all the time with this because, even in family dinners, with my mother, for example, and she'll say, "Oh, this is the best pie I ever had." And, French people find that like so ridiculous because, of course, you can't, test every single pie there is on the planet to know that this one that I'm eating right now is the best one. So, they kind of take that literally, I think, the French, whereas Americans use that euphemism, they kind of throw it around really often, the best, the world's best, whatever. So,
Yeah, that
um,
sounds very familiar. I mean, I'm from Europe myself, and I think this is also the way. It's a difference between European and American mindset. You know?
oh, definitely. Definitely. And I even had a client once that would complain, like, I can't stand all this American writing and you don't spell it like that. And the British English is spelled this way. And I'm like, oh, sorry. Well, We don't,
Yeah.
as Americans, we don't necessarily, take that into consideration. And, we just consider like British English is, I don't know, like they're the ones spelling it wrong. So anyway,
Yeah,
so
these
from
are great examples. Yeah.
yeah. So from your experience engaging with US-based OEM program holders, what would you say is the most common challenge that many of them face?
Well, this is also a tricky one. I mean, it could be a number of things. I think in the first place, I think you need to understand that building an OEM ISV partner program is a school of patience already. So, and it's yielding results over the long run, and it takes time and effort to build this, and not only with the pre-sales cycle, but also through the entire life cycle of the partnership. And for especially for OEM type of partnerships, there might be also more post-sales activity than when targeting typical end user customer. So I think these these initiatives would be already challenging anyway. But imagine then you have to do the nurturing in this kind of things in so-called foreign markets, which I'm not really familiar with. So I think that this is a thing that a lot of players struggle with, and yeah, it's more challenging to nurture, I think. Now there are maybe some smaller program holders, which could already have face challenges with nurturing audiences. But I think if you want to nurture your audience abroad, it might also be more efficient, as I already pointed out before, to do this in local language. I mean, are you going to provide them with content in English, or would it be better if you create content in the local language? Then I think the audience might realize that you understand their issues, and that you put time and effort in, well, branching into the market.
Right. So, yeah, and I agree with you too. I mean, I do think that, ISV OEM relationships are a longer, sales cycle, so to speak. I mean, I kind of say sales in quotation marks because it's not necessarily a sales cycle, but, obviously the impact on my product or my service, usually it's product, but obviously that has to be taken into consideration before I'm going to embed another solution into my product. Like there's that whole aspect of, understanding what the benefit is going to be and what is the impact on my end user customer. And I think too that a lot of times, an ISV needs to really carefully weigh their options. Do I develop it myself, or do I go with a third party application that I embed into my product? So there is more time that's going to, be necessary in order for that relationship to be built. And it's not just like, oh yeah, I need some licenses, so let me buy some licenses, right? So
Exactly.
certainly it's not a simple kind of decision that somebody's just going to make a snap decision and, decide to do it. So I agree with you definitely on that point. So as we know, OEM usually represents just a small percentage of the overall business of an ISV that targets other ISVs to embed their product. So for such companies, why do you think it's so important for them then to branch out into markets outside of the US?
Yeah, well, I think definitely branching out in other markets generates obviously more opportunities, but it also increases your mind share. I mean, you get in touch with different types of ISVs that might be already well-established ISVs who have also on their end lots of end users. So, I mean, this is very good for your course company. And of course, as you mentioned, the OEM represents a small percentage of the overall business, but in the long run, it could really generate a stable revenue stream. Should turn a profit from every
Yeah,
sale the
sure.
partner makes.
Sure.
It's definitely worth investing in this, if you ask me. And I think, yeah, globalization makes the world become smaller, and markets that seem not relevant today might be of great importance tomorrow. Right? You mentioned already maybe there's some unicorns, the tech giants of the future might be there. So I think you might also want to build networks in these kind of markets. And another thing is from a bit different point is that many countries or regions have also their own strong features. They have their own culture. Um, but for instance, in Western Europe, there are a lot of legacy players that can be targeted. Uh, and in addition, they have a huge number of well-funded and innovative players.
Mm.
I think it's a really stable market. ISVs have been around already for a long time. So, and for APAC, for instance, it's a very dynamic market in terms of funding and innovation. Of course, you can think of
Yeah,
China,
no,
but also
newer market. Yeah, sure.
markets, yes, or the Middle East and Africa. I think these markets are largely unexplored, if I may say so. I mean, there's a lot of untapped opportunities,
Mm.
and this market is very interesting, but it's still under-addressed by a lot of players.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think that sometimes people tend to, maybe the top 3 markets, and then they don't necessarily look at some of the others. So what advice would you give an OEM program holder that's looking to target ISVs in Europe?
Well, first of all, and that's very important to conduct a thorough market research. Europe is a different market than the US, and you might think that there be a lot of things we have in common, which is absolutely true. But I think it's especially if you looking for to build partnerships, it's all about the details. So it's very important to know your market well. So it's dangerous to assume that the same approach that works for the US works evenly well for Europe or for Asia. So I think it's really important also to invest in people or in a team that really focus on the market, and you might seriously want to consider hiring native speakers for that. And I know that especially if you're smaller player and you're interested in branching out, but you would say like, well, I don't have the resources to do that. I mean, building relationships really requires time. That's absolutely true. You might also want to consider using a market agency to help them. So you can use the expertise they have, especially if they have experience in running campaigns and in doing the outreach in local language. They can even help you generating local content, which is really crucial.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of misconception too around marketing agencies that like, oh, they'll never really be able to understand the concepts of OEM because it's too complicated. And obviously, we know from our own experience that that's not true. I know that our team really prefers the OEM campaigns over the end user ones by far. But in addition to that, I think your point is a valid one. I think some OEM program holders, at least that I've had contact with, really feel that they need to have a local in-house person based in that particular market. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Obviously, it depends on your offer. It depends on the complexity of the integration process and a lot of other factors. But I do think that, in today's business world, I mean, everyone, especially now, is so used to doing business from a distance, doing virtual types of, meetings and things of this nature that I don't think it's impossible to think that that business can be done virtually as well. So just another little point there too. So, what do you think are some important aspects for OEM program holders to consider as they try to build an ISV ecosystem?
Yeah, do not just focus on your local market. This could of course uh, apply to US based players, but also for other players. I hear a lot of people saying they're perfectly fine focusing on the US. From my conversations, like this is what we want to be. This is by far the most interesting market for us, and I don't want to say it's not, but I wonder how valid such a statement is in all cases. But I can imagine that setting up a program requires a lot of time and effort, and you're simply not ready for taking this step. That could be the case, of course. But on the other hand, there's also a whole world to conquer, and the world is getting smaller every day. I mean,
Mm,
globalization is a big thing. I mean, people connect everywhere in the world. I mean, the world is so small
sure.
nowadays. if you branch out into new markets, you will be more competitive. It's mainly successful if you know your audience. That's the key thing. So partnering could, of course, be very beneficial, but it's so important that the match really fits. So I would really, yeah, I would really say like invest some time in that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think actually this whole COVID pandemic has made that even more critical today because the companies that really have survived this crisis are the ones that have diversified, that haven't put all their eggs in one basket, that haven't, been too focused on one particular market because, obviously economies have taken a hit and, different industries have been decimated.
Yeah,
Diversification for me is really key today too. And I think looking towards the future for economic recovery, it makes so much sense to start now investing in
yeah,
some of those, markets abroad. So definitely
yeah.
agree with you there. Is there anything else you wanted to add today to talk about just in general? I mean, I know some of these questions were a little bit hard to answer and a bit vague, but is there anything else that you'd like
Yeah.
to add for our audience to keep in mind?
Yeah, well, we are talking about US-based players that are overly US-centric. So, in fact, this applies to software players worldwide. I know that the US market is a very interesting one, and I think that many of those players are maybe also that are outside the US are also overly focused on the US. So, there are a lot of opportunities outside your market. It might be worth exploring. So, indeed, as you mentioned, it's maybe a bit vague all this, but I'm always happy to if you think this is interesting, if this resonates with you, just feel free to contact me, drop me a note on LinkedIn or send an email. I mean, always happy to have a chat.
Yeah, super. No, I was just thinking of one other point though, as you were talking. I mean, I do think sometimes there's a compliance aspect that may come to play where some players may have some niche kind of solution, maybe a, I don't know, payment or accounting or finance type of solution. And they think like, oh, there are local rules and regulations maybe we need to abide by. And that, also goes back to your point in talking about market research and being really prepared and, understanding the market. And I do agree with you that there's no point in limiting yourself, but it does take careful planning. And of course, we're always willing to help brainstorm ideas, give our inside counsel, and we have tons of other great resources that can also help you when you want to design your marketing strategy to go global on our resource library at mediadev.com. And you can write to either Matt or myself at contact@mediadev.com, and we'd be happy to arrange a meeting at any time to talk to you further about this topic or other topics of your interest. Great. So thanks again so much, Matt. Really appreciate your time today. And we'll catch you again soon for another podcast episode at mediadev.com. Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Okay, take care, Liz. Thank you.